Hey there, Eli again, coming at you from the coral rooms of OSA Coventry, here today with another episode of What is a Coral? So today I wanted to talk about one of my personal favorite types of coral, and that is the family Cyphastrea. Cyphastrea generally are encrusting corals. I've got a handful of them in front of me here. And for the most part, most Cyphastreas, like I just mentioned, are encrusters. So these corals will grow very tightly to the rockwork, and they basically will take up the shape of whatever is below them. So if they grow over an old coral skeleton, they will basically grow tightly to that formation and just encrust the entire face of that structure. Cyphastreas come in a multitude of colors and shades. I've got at least 7 types in front of me here, and there are countless more out there. A lot of these examples that you see in the trade actually come with names like the meteor shower Cyphastrea, alien pox Cyphastrea, and many more. However, they all share those very similar characteristics. For the most part, these corals have small flower-shaped polyps that are surrounded by a thin layer of tissue and skeleton, and they do not generally put down a large amount of mass. These corals are most likely to grow outwards and cover their surrounding environment before they are to grow outwards. However, once they establish a decent hold, sometimes you will get some vertical, almost mounding shaped growth out of them as well, once they begin to fill in their surroundings. In addition to the encrusting type, there is also branching Cyphastrea. I do have one frag of an example of that in the back here as well. This isn't the prettiest example of a branching Cyphastrea. However, just as the name suggests, the branching Cyphastrea differs from most of its Cyphastrea cousins in the fact that it will form tight branches similar to an Acropora, branching Montipora, or Stylophora colony, and it will grow upward and outward from the rock in a branch formation rather than strictly encrusting the rock. There is also some other types. There are a couple examples of plating or scrolling Cyphastreas. However, in my experience, those are a lot harder to come by and a lot more difficult to care for than your other varieties. Care for the Cyphastreas is going to be very similar across the board. Generally, they do prefer lower to medium light. They tend not to need a ton of light. However, higher light might give you better coloration in some examples. And they generally need just enough flow, at least for the encrusting varieties, to make sure that sediment and waste are not collecting on the outside of the colony, which would then kind of lead to some deterioration and tissue loss in the center. As long as these corals are getting an okay amount of light and a moderate amount of flow, they should do pretty well for you. As stony corals, they do use up alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, and keeping those parameters pretty stable for a Cyphastrea is key to long-term success with them. For your branching varieties, some of those same characteristics are the same. However, they tend to tolerate a little bit more flow and a little bit more light than their encrusting counterparts would. Placement for these corals, I would say anywhere mid to lower rockwork would be sufficient, and making sure you give them enough space around themselves to spread out and grow is important. A lot of the Cyphastreas do have a decently potent sting, so once they start to encounter other corals, a lot of times they will sting those neighboring corals. They might also participate a little bit in chemical warfare, especially on a very close proximity, once they get nice and tight up to another type of coral. One of the fun parts about encrusting corals is that you can basically train them to grow in whatever shape you desire. There are a lot of pictures out on the internet of examples of people adding these to small reef-safe statues, whether that be a skull or some other shapes. I've seen a lot of cool, interesting designs where people have glued small pieces of Cyphastrea to them and allowed them to encrust that shape, and that kind of gives you a really cool appearance once that shape gets all filled in with Cyphastreas. Otherwise, a really interesting idea that I've seen in a few aquariums is placing a Cyphastrea on your back glass or your overflow box. And as this encrusts flat to the glasswork, you get a really cool appearance, a different backdrop against the back of the tank. That also helps to avoid any sort of fouling the glass on the back of your aquarium. And in this case, if the Cyphastrea starts to grow a little bit too far for what you desire, just using a clean, straight razor blade against the glass is an easy way to chip this piece back off and keep it in check as it starts to grow. And that way you don't have to worry about it starting to encrust on power heads or into your overflow box. Whereas most of these Cyphastreas look very similar in appearance, and it's very difficult to differentiate different species from one another, especially on the hobbyist level. Not all of them play nicely with each other, so it can be kind of difficult placing them next to each other. I have seen instances where certain Cyphastreas will at least fuse together if they are placed next to each other, and once they start to grow, intermingle their tissues and they tend not to fight. However, in my experience, some of the Cyphastreas are a little more aggressive than some of their close cousins, and they may happen to sting even other Cyphastreas if they come a little bit too closely. So placement, if you desire to keep a group of Cyphastreas, can be a little tricky as they don't all get along very well. They are also quite aquaculturable. Most of your Cyphastrea strains grow pretty quickly, and once they begin to grow pretty well, they can be chipped with bone cutters if they are thin enough, or they can be cut with very good success with a bandsaw, and they can be cut into even very small 2 or 3 polyp portions and still have decent success once they start to growing out, and that makes them a really good candidate for the aquaculture setting. Most of the types of Cyphastrea that you see available on the market have been grown in the hobby for a few years, at least at this rate. For all the reasons I mentioned before, Cyphastreas are one of my favorite corals. It's just hard to beat all those different colors, all the cool texture. As always, thank you guys for sticking around and watching this What is a Coral episode on Cyphastrea. Let us know in the comment section below if you have questions, maybe suggestions for future videos. And as always, keep on reefing.